it's gone down to maybe 168 or something like that. And because of all the bookings and the people who get booked and they get released right away, our average length of stay is only 10.5 days. And we're trying to figure out a way to take out the people who are booked and released immediately so we can focus on the people who are there longer term, so we would be better at screening people into the program. And then the agency I work for is Human Services, which is unique even in Wisconsin. It's not something that's common. But the organization I work for is Chemical Health and Justice Sanctions. So we manage the substance abuse dollars for the county and then Justice Sanctions, which includes bail monitoring or pretrial release. Anyone who's sentenced goes on electronic monitoring, and that's something that we supervise. Treatment courts, we have both a drug treatment court and also a treatment court for multiple drunk drivers. Wisconsin has a significant alcohol issue and a drunk driving issue, so that's one of the programs that we have worked on for a number of years. In the OWA treatment court, we have 130 people on an average in that program. A drug court has about 20. Very different. And then we have a program specifically for women, because historically we didn't have anything for women in the community. There were a lot of programs for men, but not for women. So a few years ago, we started to develop something for women. And then the TJC initiative, the Transition from Jail to Community Initiative, has really helped us prioritize who we should focus on, what kinds of programs we should focus on. We were doing some of the cruise ship programs in La Crosse County, so we've changed that, so we're doing a lot more of the cognitive-based programs, Smart Recovery, or Thinking for a Change, which is a cognitive behavioral program in the jail. So we're focusing more on having those services in the jail and in the community. This is where, again, I've been extremely fortunate, because in La Crosse, it's, in many ways, it's been the county board of supervisors that has been the leader in developing these kinds of alternatives. So we've been supported in that regard. And then we also have a Criminal Justice Management Council. And there are, if any of you have heard of a Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, is usually what they're called, but there's usually a judge and a public defender, the prosecutor, the DA, people from probation and parole, the sheriff. In our county, we have 7 citizen members. We have a person who represents victims, and they come together monthly and have meetings. And for example, that was the group that said, yeah, we think it's important that you apply for the TJC initiative. So they are sort of the oversight committee. They're not necessarily one of the power structures in La Crosse County. I mean, I report to Health and Human Services for my budget issues, but this is more of a philosophical board that I report to. The sheriff is really on board with this at this point. And the sheriff in Wisconsin, it's the sheriff who runs the jail. So it's different than here, and I understand that, but he has been very supportive. And so has the jail administrator. She is on the team that has been working on this project. And then because we are part of Human Services, I think that Human Services was not on board originally with working with the criminal justice population. When I started this job, I was not part of Human Services, and there had to be a significant amount of arm twisting at times to get the Human Services people on board. They sort of wanted to leave the people in jail, not provide any services, but over time, it's the Human Services Department that has increased, whether it's substance abuse or mental health services in the jail. We've been the people who have funded that. So it just allows better access to county programs. We know how to refer people to some of the programs, and then we also pay more attention to evidence-based practices. So things that will have a better likelihood of reducing crime over time, which is, again, what we're all working toward. And if any of you have any questions as I'm talking, please let me know. To go back to how we started this, not only was it the county board that was instrumental at first in starting the program, but the judges were really interested. And again, 16 years ago when I started, they were the drivers along with the county board of supervisors. And what we wanted the TJC process to do is to shift us from a court-driven process where it was always a court referral, where we're trying to change that, where we're taking, again, the risk and needs assessment, determining who are the best fit for this kind of project, and giving the information to the judge so that the judge has it ahead of time. This wasn't done prior to the TJC initiative. It was very court-driven. Each agency did not work together. We all did our own thing. We didn't talk to each other. We didn't share very well. We all had our own little sandbox and liked it just fine. So this has really encouraged us to be much more collaborative and work together better. I remember when I talked to Jesse Janetta, who's our liaison with the TJC initiative, and he was encouraging me to include community providers, and I was like, Jesse, I don't want to do that. We never have good luck with that. It always turns out bad. And do we have to? And he said yes. And now, in retrospect, I'm very glad he said yes, because it's been, I think, one of the best things that we've done in La Crosse County. And the other thing is that we did a lot of assessments, but they didn't really, there wasn't any planning that went along with it, but now we're including probation and parole and the jail and treatment providers, and it's worked out quite wonderfully. There's a monthly meeting with the community partners. We met monthly for 2 years. We've now changed that to quarterly. But we just come together and talk about what we've been doing, how we're working with the people who are this population, people who are either in jail or are on probation or on some other kind of criminal justice program in the community. Again, we always focus on evidence-based decision making. What does the research show that works best with this population? These are our community partners, which they've been, the study people who have come practically to every meeting. Along the right is the core team, or the implementation team. So Vicki Burke is one of the county supervisors. She's been on the committee. She's done most of the traveling with us also and meets with us monthly. Doris Daggett is the jail administrator, has been very helpful. Mike Kiefer is the jail program coordinator. Mary Kay Wolf is one of the community partners who has been on this project, and then me. Coulee Cap is a housing program in La Crosse County. It tends to be where people who are in poverty, or I'm trying to think of who else, they tend to get some of the federal dollars for housing. They have been our partners, and because of this project, they slotted 5 what's called TBRA, tenant-based rental assistance spots for people coming out of the jail for 18 months. So that they would have 5 spots that we knew that some of our high users in the jail could go into those spots. It didn't take us long to fill those up, but what the county also did was put some money toward that we had saved in some other places. So we had a little bit more money that we can help people with some rent. Workforce Connections is again our employment agency in the community, and we have worked together with them on a number of projects. They were partners with us in something called Offender Workforce Development Specialist. It's a 240-hour program to help offenders get employment. And it was a training that came in and helped us with that. And they've been part of that. They run a monthly employment group. And so they've been super helpful with that. The Department of Corrections, which in Wisconsin is probation and parole, has been active. AMOS is it's a lot of congregations in La Crosse County come together and talk about how they can be helpful to people who are incarcerated. And one of the things that they started were circles of support, where there's a core member, someone who's been incarcerated or in the system, and then they have basically a circle of people in the community who are pro-social, who can help guide them and become mentors, and they meet with them regularly too. So that's something that we can refer people to. Added Correctional Services would be like, who did we meet with this morning?
Northern Human Services.
Northern Human Services. They're a private, nonprofit that works with people who are in the criminal justice system, and primarily with men, which is why we started something for women, because their focus was primarily men, and they are funded through probation and parole. Coulee Youth Services provides some services in the community for adults. In our situation, they also provide services for children, but with us it's primarily adults. They provide outreach services, so people who are sort of the more serious substance abusers but are not interested in treatment, they will make contact with them, possibly take them to meetings, again, be mentors and support for them in the community. The YWCA has been a partner. Obviously, Mary Kay Wolf is on the team. The La Crosse Community Foundation is a local organization that has funded many of our projects initially until we sort of get our feet on the ground and determine if they're effective. Great Rivers 211 is sort of a first call for help. So if I'm having a bad day, I could call there, but people can also call there and say, can you tell me where the food pantries are? Can you tell me how I can get housing? So they've been a huge help with us, because they let us basically take their information and make it into a smaller resource guide for people who are in the jail. Because people who are in the jail care about housing, food, substance abuse, those kinds of things. So we made a smaller resource booklet for them. Coulee Council on Addictions, their title is self-explanatory. And then the 2 hospitals provide a lot of the substance abuse and mental health counseling for us in the community. So they've been meeting with us regularly. These are the things that La Crosse County has done as a result of the TJC initiative. Thinking for a Change is a cognitive behavioral group. We all went through the training. There are a number of community providers who also went through the training, so we facilitate that group in the jail and in the community. So if someone goes into jail, they can be in the group. If they get released, they can go to it in the community. So they can be in that program no matter what. Men and women are separated. The offender workforce development specialist, I talked about that a bit. We have people who can screen people and help them make employment plans. Housing, I talked a bit about that also. Transportation, we also put some money aside for bus tokens, which was something that we hadn't had in the past, so we can give people bus tokens and bus passes. I know transportation may not be quite as easy here. I grew up in a rural county, so I understand how that can work.
We have a bus that stops here now.
I'm sorry, what?
We have a bus that stops here now.
There you go.
Oh, that's good.
Baby steps. That's what it's always about, progress, not perfection. People in jail often didn't have their identification. It's hard to get a job in Wisconsin, I'm assuming here too, if you don't have your identification or a birth certificate or something. So the first Monday of the month in La Crosse is Free Bus Monday. So we have a volunteer who comes in and takes everyone out to the Department of Transportation and helps them get their ID, make sure they have all the paperwork. So that's something that costs us little to nothing, but it helps people get their identification. Often people just don't know where to go or what to do or what they need. So we try to provide the very basic support. Smart Recovery is a cognitive behavioral Alcoholics Anonymous is the best way to describe it. It basically focuses on thinking and versus, again, the traditional 12-step recovery. We facilitate that both in the jail and in the community. And then case conferencing has been the collaborative piece of all of this, where we all come together and talk about individuals who are in jail, who are going to be released. We are really working on making that. We're all working from the same case plan. You know, we all don't have 10 case plans for this population that tends to be easily confused anyway. So again, we have increased our communication and collaboration. We have a long way to go, by the way. I would never want to make it sound like we're doing this perfectly because we have so much work to do. But we've really made a lot of improvements. So we maintain regular meetings with the community partners. We provide a lot of presentations to the community about what we're doing. And we also have a resource area outside the jail. So if someone is being released from the jail, they can sit at a computer and look up things about employment or food or whatever it is. Right there. We don't let them go to any site they want to. We're pretty limited on what we let them go to. And they can also pick up some of the resource pamphlets that we have. And then data collection, which is something I'm sure I'll be working on for the rest of my life, but we started collecting the proxy, which is a 3-question risk assessment, and the jail staff asks the 3 questions, and then we can also ask it again. But it basically gives us a very quick snapshot of someone's risk to reoffend, which we now collect that electronically. We are working on collecting a data warehouse where it takes information from the jail and our system and pulls it together in a warehouse so that we don't have to look at information manually, which is how we have to look at a lot of data is manually, which gets very tiresome, and you never are sure that's 100% right. And that we are also shifting to a different risk and needs assessment tool because probation and parole is switching to that, and we want to be on the same page as they are. This is our process. I'll try to run through this in a not too complicated way. Along the where there's the dotted line, or I'm not sure if that's the right way to term it, but there's the dotted arrow and has the L with the 1 through 4. Those are people with that proxy screening of the 3 questions, and the 3 questions are, how old are you right now? Because we know that the younger a person is, the more likely they are to get into trouble. How old were you the first time you got arrested? Because we know if the younger the person was the first time they got arrested, it increases their likelihood to reoffend. And how many times you've been arrested overall? Again, it's an indicator. So if they come up with a 2, 3, or 4 on the proxy, they're considered low risk. And those would be the people that we would just ask them if they're aware of any needs they might have. Housing, food, substance abuse, whatever it is, and then we would give them information that goes along with that. We might refer them to some shorter courses if we had them available, but we wouldn't put them into the longer, again, 24 weeks or longer sessions. The moderate people, the 5s or 6s on the proxies, and the high-risk people, the 7, 8s, our goal is to have all of them go through a detailed risk and needs assessment. We don't do that right now, that's our goal. And then to develop a discharge plan. And part of our problem is continues that we don't know how long people are going to be in jail, but the more we can work with probation and parole and develop a case plan, then it doesn't matter at what point they are discharged, everyone would be working from the same case plan. So they might be referred to mentoring or case management or some of the housing or cognitive behavioral, whatever it is, and then that can continue into the community. So if you're going to have the TBRA housing or the tenant-based rental assistance housing, are you willing to do the cognitive behavioral group? So we negotiate about what they're willing to do. So that's our process that we are implementing in La Crosse at this point.
A couple things that are important here. The proxy takes about 3 minutes to do in booking. It doesn't take any time at all, which is a great tool. You can enter it into your booking system. What it tells you is how many of your people are low, medium, and high risk. It'd be nice to know that, just to know that. And the people who happen to be low risk, then you can measure progress based on those levels, because that's all based on the averages that they tend to come back to jail. So if you look at the high risk and the medium people, those are the ones you want to spend your money on. People are going to be there long enough where you can spend time on them, because they're the people who cost the community a lot of money, not only in terms of money, but also in terms of issues with crime. And those are issues that most people in the community really want to address. When you look at that, that's what they want to take a look at. The Thinking for a Change classes, or what we call cognitive behavioral therapy, focus on the decision-making process. And offenders, if you look at the one thing that really causes them to come to jail, is they're really bad decision makers. And 100 years ago, families taught people that stuff. We taught people how to make decisions. So many families are out there now who don't get to a point where they're taught those things anymore. So these kind of groups are actually used. In fact, a number of high schools around the country now are using CBT in the classrooms because a lot of kids are just having difficulty making decisions. And our people have had trouble all the way through their life making decisions in school, after school, all kinds of things. The other part I really like about CBT is that the accountability is on them. Okay, you're in jail, and you're in jail because you made these decisions. You did this and this. It's not about whether you got caught or didn't get caught or got arrested or didn't get arrested. If I'm driving 75 miles an hour and the speed limit is 65, whether the police officer pulls you over or not, you're still violating the conditions of whatever is required of you as a human being, the laws. And I think for them to understand it in that way is helpful, because that's something that they haven't had in the past. And I think attacking those kind of thinking processes is critical, because without that change in thinking, they're coming back. They're not going to not come back. If they think that the world is about other people and other people having issues, they're not going to do anything different. So that's the focus, and that's the one thing that seems to be really helpful. The substance abuse programming out there now, all is cognitive based. The one you're looking at as a county to look at for the jail is the CBT program. You want it to be that way. Smart Recovery is another example. It really works well. So I think those are the kind of things you look at. So I think as you look down the road, the proxy is something that's very simple, doesn't cost the county any money to implement. It's public domain, and you can do that. And I think that's something the county can look at right away. It's something to take a look at. And as we're talking here, the Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee, Jason, you and I have talked about that. Having that kind of a committee in any county makes sense, because it's bringing the people together to focus on a business plan as a group. So it's not just what the county attorney has to do in terms of prosecution or the public defender, but it's what are the people in this county in various leadership roles want to do differently. And counties that have that 10-to-1, plan better, because they can think about what they want to use their resources for, and two, they can really look down the road and say, how do we want to improve our process? And as you say, Jane, it's not, get everybody together isn't always the easiest thing, but it really helps. And it doesn't have to be every week. Sometimes it's once a month. Sometimes it's once every other month. Some places do it quarterly, but having those meetings happen, I think, is really helpful. Sorry.
So these are just some of the lessons that we've learned, is that and we said this from the beginning, is that having the leadership on board is crucial. Without that, none of this would work very well. And that the monthly meeting that we had between the core group and the community partners was really fundamental. With, again, if we didn't have those consistent and ongoing meetings, it's easy to just forget about what's going on, and no one really wants to pay attention. You will have the same issue here, I'm assuming, but jails just have a rapid turnaround of inmates. In prisons, people are there for, at least in Wisconsin, it's a year. So they have time to sort of putz around and do assessments and plan what they're going to do with someone. But in jails, people are in and out of jail very quickly sometimes. So it can be a little bit more complicated to plan for those things. We opened our first direct supervision pod in the last year or so in La Crosse County, which helped with just the culture shift among the officers in the jail. They understood why we were doing better. They got more training. It was much easier to engage them and the inmates in the programs. We believe this process promotes a better use of our funds. We think that we spent a lot more money on things like detox and some other residential treatment historically, where now we focus more on the community aspect of this, and that the media can really be our friend. About a year ago, they helped us with a town hall meeting that we televised from the jail. It was before we had opened the direct supervision pod, so that the community could see the jail. They could talk, questions were asked about why we do what we do, and they're also pretty helpful when we have new programs and they write stories that are helpful. So we have learned that they can be our friend more than what we considered them to be in our past. So.
And Jen, I think the media is such a critical part of that, because I think, sharing where you're going and the goals should be shared with everybody, and that's the best way to do it, to be clear about what you're doing, be clear about how it's going, what's going well, what could be improved. I always like the concept of a community when they're presenting on how they're doing, whatever it is here's what's going really well, here's what we can improve on, and here's how we're going to get there. And I think oftentimes that's the way we want to do it, is talk about both the things that are going great and the things that can get better. Because no program, no model I've ever been involved in has ever been perfect yet. So I still strive for that, but I haven't been around one. But they improve over time. So in the 1970s, there was really little accountability for offenders, lots of treatment, but there was no connection between the treatment and the accountability at all. And so we went away from that. We locked everybody up in the 1980s, and we incarcerated more people than anybody in the world, right? So everybody went to jail and prison in the 1980s. Well, that didn't work either. We didn't show any results from that model either. What the newer paradigm is you're balancing the fact that you have to hold people accountable, and you have to offer them some ways to change their life to turn it around, or you're going to have a cycle that's going to keep going on. So the balance of between holding people accountable and also offering them some of the things that they need, but differently than before, in that it's very targeted, in that I call it, who's driving the bus. The offender doesn't get to pick what programs they go to necessarily. It's targeted by what the needs are, who are the most likely people to come back, and it's your money. I always think about that. Whose money is it that you're looking at? You're spending the money as a county, and you want to target it for the people you're going to get the best return on, like we do in private industry and any other places. And I think that's the difference. And some of the sites I work with struggle with the fact, well, don't the offenders get to pick who goes into what? And I said, no. I think they can choose not to go, but there's going to be incentives for those who do. But you want to target the offenders who are most likely to come back. And that's, again, a different way of doing business than we did in the past. And so that way, you can spend your resources in a more effective way with the population going forward. And the other part to that is really good collaboration. James County has done an incredible job collaborating as a community. And I think the impact of that is as much about that as anything, because they're working together, and because they are working together, they're making better decisions. It's not all these little silos of people working separately. And the more that people in the CJ system tend to work in silos, the more we tend not to do the best job we can. And I think our collective strength is in working together. And I've seen lots of counties all over the country who have done that, have done a really good job down the road. The other part of this, as you look at this, is you're not just talking about what happens to them in jail, but there's a connection to what happens when they walk out the door. And for, up until recently, we haven't really talked about what happens when they walk out the door. And great treatment programming inside without a connection to the outside, they have very little impact. So if you don't have that ability where you do something inside and you connect them to the outside, the two things together have a massive change in terms of the business plan. You can think about an offender who maybe has never done anything in their life, all of a sudden gets some services, they get something, the light bulb goes off, and then they walk out the door. And they say, all right, what do I do now? Where do I go? How do I get to the next step in the process?
I think that's been one of our major problems.
Yeah.
They walk out the door and nobody's there.
Right.
No private organization or,
Yeah.
I
No
think,
housing?
no housing. They
Yeah.
don't know where the next meal is going to be, maybe. But there was a local business here that were taking in some of these inmates, like, if I stand corrected, just down the street. I can't think of the name of it right now, but it's down 16 on the right-hand side. They were taking some of the inmates, and I don't be interested to follow up to see how many of those came back. But they provided a job for them.
An interesting project we found out about today that Northern Human Services is involved in. What's the name of the project?
Keystone Point.
Keystone Project. You're the one place in the state that's targeted for a transition program for a certain number of offenders who get that link on the way out. And what we were talking about today, and we can give you more detail in the reports, is the concept of connecting those high-risk people into your drug and alcohol treatment program that you're just putting in the jail, and have those same people followed by probation, the DOC, and Northern Human Services on the way out. So the person follows all the way through the system, and by doing that, you're targeting that high-risk group with funding that already exists, for the most part, and then they're getting incentivized to, if they do well in that, they're your best candidates for electronic home confinement, and then back into the community, and the probation officer, Northern Human Services and the DOC are connecting them and moving them out the door in an organized way. And we're putting together a WebEx with that group just to talk about how to really pull all that together, because you've got this new piece you're doing on drug and alcohol education, which makes sense, and then you have this transition piece that makes sense. But if there's, as these projects work together now, the probation officer can meet them at the door, or before the door, and then Northern Human Services works with them on the way out. So you've got the three agencies that are really wrapping around these people, now then doing it together. And by doing that, you have the same number of dollars, but they begin to be used much more effectively because you're coordinating it together. And that is some of the time, what happens is in a community is you're doing some really good work already, but by doing a couple of extra things, you really get a much better return on your investment because you're connecting the dots. The probation officer knows exactly what the DOC did. The Northern Human Services knows what that is. And this is still new. So probation had this initiative, the DOC was working on a piece, now we're talking about coordinating them together. And that's kind of the next step. I think that's one of the things we clearly want you to look at. It's not a cost factor for the county, and it's a way to use dollars that are already there. People always get worried when us folks come into town that we're going to recommend things that are $5 million and all that. But what we try to do most of the time is find ways to use what you're doing now really effectively. And if you need something else, also looking at outside resources for funding as well. If you can create a model like this, by the way, the federal government is more interested in funding them as a model site. Other foundations and other places in this community would be more likely to do it because you're building a model that they call now a best practice model. And the things that we're talking about here, you would be, if you had the proxy, again, which is a no cost factor really, and you have all these together, you now begin to build this transition model. So, not all 55 inmates that are at the jail are going to get the service, but the ones who are going to be people who are going to be here for a while, who are high to medium on the proxy, and then transition out.
So what you're saying is that there is money out there to help with this project?
Short term, yes, there is money down the road. Right now, the project you're implementing, you're funded for, the small targeted project. But if you look at expansion, there could be some opportunities. There's pros and cons to funding, and everybody has a different place to weigh in on that. Like Sullivan County found some funding from Second Chance because they built this kind of a model and they were able to get federal funding for it. What that does is help you test out a model. But what you want to do is only apply for the amount of money down the road that's somewhere you can sustain. So you want to apply for a targeted amount of money that you feel could help you long term. It doesn't. So they offer opportunities for up to X number of dollars, but you don't want to necessarily apply for that because you want to apply for the amount of dollars that you feel like, as a community down the road, if you were to foot the bill, you'd be able to take care of. But what it does do is help you test a model out for a year or two, see if it works for you, and then as a community, make a decision on whether to keep it and move it forward. Do you have some thoughts on that? No. Okay. So those are things to look at, but there's the Second Chance Act on a federal level that has some reentry money. They have 2 or 3 categories that you could look at. There's also some opportunities around the state, not a lot. We all know that those dollars are diminished. Is probably a nice word to say, right? Would you say diminished? In my work in the other counties, I've seen the human service budgets be very much decimated over the last year or two, and some of the agencies we talked to today and some others have lost 50% of their staff.
Yeah. I mean, there was something in the court system some years ago where they were getting funding, but once the funding was cut off, they couldn't do it anymore, and it was working.
Yeah, right. And I think that the key to that, personally, in my personal opinion, this is just my opinion, is that you want to fund what you need to do, and not fund a model that's so massive that you can do that. I worked on a juvenile project in Sullivan County, and we did get funding from the federal government to fund it. What we found, though, was that what we had applied for, we didn't need that much. We looked at all the parts of the project that we had, and we felt that you know, initially there were a couple of case managers, and we realized, you know, we really don't. This is the target population. We actually don't need that kind of funding. And they were able to begin to look at funding it locally because the model was smaller than the model they applied for down the road. So you want to apply for funding that you think is reasonable, you know, is what you need.
Meet your demands.
What's that?
Meet something that meets your needs.
Meet your needs, but certainly, you know, isn't whatever you call the, you know, the most expensive car kind of a thing. It's not the Cadillac version, it's the mid-sized car version. I think that's what you want to do, is fund what you need to do. And the proxy helps you get there, because then you're not spending money on all the offenders. If you try to provide service for all 55 people at this